Let's chat, shall we? So I have invited my other panelists. I have some questions for each speaker, but of course, if you have questions for each other, this is a dialogue, and I just think it makes a more fun conversation, and in my opinion, not biased, it's a very fun topic about advocacy. So I'm sure you've noticed that, on this panel, there's a funder, and there's a Department of Ed staff. So let's address the elephant in the room. Why advocacy? Why are you engaged with advocacy? How can we kind of take away that fear with other funders and other departments of ed and engaging more with advocacy? And then, Andrew, if you want to put in a why advocacy for you, that would be great as well. Whoever wants to go first.
As a state employee, advocacy is a really sort of area that we have to tiptoe around. It's true. But as you said, when you think about everything in terms of the student, what's good for the student, that makes advocacy, I think, a little easier to swallow for the people that I work with. So, because that's our mantra at the Department of Ed. It's all about the student. So.
Yeah, and in terms of foundation work, I'm sure everyone realizes we're very nervous around that word. And so why am I on this panel? Now, I think it's more about, I think we approach it more as educating the public. And we are not advocating, we are funding organizations that advance the ideas around the power of arts education. And we are trying to impact systems. So many foundations are trying to impact systems, so it's totally within our guidelines. And quite frankly, most nonprofits and foundations have a lot of room, more room than they're actually taking in that advocacy world. So I don't see messaging or education as something that we can be involved in.
And well, the reason I'm in this room is because my buddy Narek and I worked on Howard Dean's presidential campaign way back in 2003 and 2004. So I was a young, idealistic, progressive wanting to change the world. And now I'm a little bit of an older, idealistic, progressive,
Okay, good.
Trying to change the world a little bit. And so it took a while, but I found a job in polling that pays me to sort of work on this and try to affect change in areas that matter to me. So it worked out.
It's wonderful. I love how you all touched on that advocacy as a spectrum. I love that. And Andrew, not to put you on the spot again, I think you briefly mentioned it, but I find with public opinion polling, when you go talk to both sides of the aisle with an elected official, they say, who are you polling exactly? Where are these numbers coming from? How can we be sure that this is nonpartisan or bipartisan, whatever language you prefer using?
And so we do all kinds of research, but the research we usually take to elected officials, we survey voters, either registered voters or generally voters that are likely to vote in the next election that matters to them. And so this is a little technical, but the way we do that is their voter files that I think probably a lot of you know, so it's very easy to use that to sort of project who's going to vote. But what's really important, I think, you brought this up, is credibility. It's very easy to write a poll to get the results that you want, but the public leaders and advocates are very, they understand. I'm losing the word. They see through that really quickly if you do that. So it's really important to craft a poll that uses the language the other side uses, that doesn't use biased questioning, et cetera. And I'm a Democratic pollster, so certainly if we're talking to a bipartisan group, we almost always get a Republican partner so that we come that together, because we wouldn't really get through the door without that.
No, that's a really good point. This question's for Lana, because, and she touched on this a little bit, but Arkansas, with its SP3 plan at first, had two very distinct goals, one with the professional development workshops, and then the other creating Arkansans for the arts. When did you find that they started to merge and become one?
That's a really good question, because I spent a lot of time and thinking space at the beginning of this project trying to figure out how those two things synced. As a matter of fact, those of you who have been coming to SP3 meetings know that from the beginning, my colleague Craig and I would actually do dual reports because he was working on the Arkansans for the Arts project, and I was working on the goals implementation project. And it was really a struggle. It really was. And I think it was finally, when we finally got to those regional meetings, the agenda for the day included 2 panels. And one panel was basically about arts education, and the other panel was basically a broader base, people interested in the economy and business people and whatnot. And we really worked to make it all one meeting and not 2 separate meetings in those panels. And I think that was when it finally came together at those regional meetings. And I think I mentioned this yesterday when I was working on my notes. It was so hard for me at the beginning, and yet when I made these notes for this presentation today, it was difficult for me to tease them apart now, now that it's all worked together.
That's wonderful. I did want to pause. Do any of you have a question for each other before I keep plugging away? Keep going? Okay. So I did, in my opinion, you just have more, it's very successful when there is a broad cross-sector coalition. So in terms of establishing your own coalitions, one, can you talk about how you brought on a new partner? Or 2, who's a dream partner that you would love to add on to your coalition with your ongoing work in arts education advocacy?
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this exactly head on, but I do think that as you bring on partners, it goes beyond an invitation. We always forget to find ways to get people to buy into what we believe in, right? We always just invite them and think that that's enough, and then we tell them all the great things about what we do. Instead of finding ways that they can be a part of the design of the plan, they can be part of figuring out what do the standards look like, because those who do the work do the learning. And I think that you have to design for mechanisms to do those kinds of things where you build something together. And I think for us, one of the dream partners, although they don't necessarily show up to our meetings, has been the New Jersey DOE, the commissioner, making sure that we have the commissioner on board, that we honor her. We've honored commissioners at our governor's awards because they actually have made a commitment. And then I'd say the other person at the DOE that's been really invaluable to us, besides our arts representative there, has been our data person. And our leaders have got their buy-in. We didn't ask permission, but they were part of the design. So we got to the place where, it was their idea to include it in the report card. Those were valuable things. And I think that's the nuance that you have to, the different way to ride that wave.
Awesome. Andrew, do you have any?
I don't think this is really my area of expertise, so.
Okay, it's fine.
My answer may be indirect as well. I think the perfect partner is sometimes different in different situations. I've been really pleased with, again, I'm going to go back to the regional roundtable discussions that we had, the fact that Arkansans for the Arts, the whole concept was to work regionally. And so the first roundtable was in Southeast Arkansas. It was that's the Delta. There are no arts organizations. I had to look hard to find an arts council to even, talk to. So the theme of that meeting was meet the resources, and we brought in speakers from the Delta Regional Authority and grant makers and so forth. And then we went to Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas, where there's Crystal Bridges and the University of Arkansas, and there's a gallery on every corner. Their needs were how to take the wonderful resources that are everywhere and protect them, preserve them. And I'm really excited because our next one coming up after the first of the year is going to be in Central Arkansas in Little Rock. And Little Rock is experiencing a sort of a problem with crime right now. I mean, it's a little bit scary. And so the theme of that meeting is really going to be how to use the arts and arts education to unify the city, how to work through the arts to bring some unity to the city. So that's going to take a completely different kind of partner. I mean, we're looking at talking to the police department and so forth, you know, as participants in that conversation and network. So so I think that the issue of the day may determine who the perfect partner is.
Can I add another thing? Because I looked across the room and realized, for us, you know, on our team, we had a couple people. We had the representation from the Education Law Center, whose primary mission is equity for every New Jersey student. And, you know, they really don't think often, they have an event around arts education, interestingly, but they don't talk about it in any of their briefings, et cetera. But so we brought them on board on our committee, which I think was really smart, because now they are sort of thinking more deeply about what that looks like and how arts can be an equalizer. And they're also really good with the data that we need. And then the other person is, I think we brought on Mary Reese, who was with the Foundation for Educational Administration, because not only because she's a brilliant woman, but that kind of relationship has been really helpful to us, because Mary is the person, and her team are the people, they're the ones training principals, administrators, and superintendents. They're the ones who, if they hold a conference and then have a section about the arts, people will attend it and believe in it. So that has been a real linchpin for our movement. And when the Arts Education Partnership, now the Arts Ed New Jersey, got their own 501c3 just 2 years ago now. It's very new. We didn't start there, which was, I think, helpful. But Mary and Marie are some of the first board members. So they have a long history with it, and they have a sensibility of how to take it to the next stage of its life cycle.
That's wonderful. And I just wanted to pivot. Andrew, I wanted to go back to when you speak with voters, being at their level. Could you give us an example? Because I think vocabulary is such a key thing with, reaching across different audiences. Could you give us an example of just the type of vocabulary, or a different word can mean a different thing to a voter than what you are thinking it means?
Yeah, and that's, I think, something that happens a lot with wonky folks, which I am also, and who I work with a lot, particularly at the sort of congressional legislative level. You hear people talking a lot about, well, particularly in, like, say, a political campaign. You might hear somebody trying to sort of tout themselves to voters, and so they want to write an ad that said, well, when this bad bill got forwarded, I voted for the motion to reconsider, or they use just very technical, wonky terms about what happened up on the Hill, and it's just like, no, you opposed it, you voted to stop it, and that can go towards any sort of advocacy level education. If we're trying to pass something that's very complicated, or even not that complicated in terms of a program or whatnot, you don't want to dumb it down. Voters are not idiots. They're smart, but they're not rocket scientists. And the amount of time that they have to think about your issue in a day is very, very small. So you have to simplify it, make it easy to understand, and make it short. And that's the other thing. Like, they don't have, you can't spend 3 paragraphs explaining why your program or your bill or whatever is good. It's got to be 2 sentences, and it's got to be straight to the point.
Wonderful. And I wanted to now talk about just kind of the logistics, the nitty-gritty of working in a coalition, because And for Andrew, when you're working with a Republican firm, like who's on first? Who takes ownership for what part of the portfolio? And how do you all kind of, or how do you make sure that all of the players in the coalition are on the same page? Just, if you could just talk a couple points about how you stay organized as a coalition for your greater good.
Oh, sure. And I mean, a better example actually is I can tell you a little bit about a poll I'm working on right now here in the state for a bunch of environmental groups. I think there are about 14 different groups at the table between state groups and national groups. It's a challenge because, and I'm sure this is something that you guys, face when you're building your own coalitions, but they all sort of have the same end goal, but they've all got their tangential goals and there are other things that they think and this, that, and it requires huge organization. I mean, when we're working right now on drafting a survey, so I think we've gone through 6 different drafts now, and it just requires us to sort of keep this very updated document, and we get 15 different emails from different people every day with different edits to it, making sure that we know this person wants this and that person wants this, and so in the end we have to sort of be the arbiter and the decision maker and say, we're going with this because we think that's going to be the strongest message, kind of thing. But it just takes a lot of organization and a lot of patience to deal with that. When it comes to working with a Republican firm, that's actually usually pretty simple. Generally, either we'll take the lead or they'll take the lead. We'll draft the survey and they'll review it. Then when we go to the Hill, we just sort of tag team it. They talk to the Republicans, we talk to the Democrats, kind of thing.
Sure. Wendy or Lana? About how you guys keep your coalition in line, who takes lead on which projects, how you stay organized as a coalition.
So are you speaking to the SP3 coalition or just
Could be,
our
I was
partnership?
thinking of SP3, but honestly, if you want to use another example, I think sometimes that's the questions that Americans for the Arts we get is like, how do you keep so many players, all the cooks in the kitchen, towards the same goal to make the same recipe?
Yeah, it is. I think for us, it's been helpful to have the campaign, but we've noticed that, so for example, there are all kinds of partners in this work that don't always get to be part of the conversation or in the umbrella. So we have, need to think about, for example, teaching artists. They are the actual people who are working with our children often, and sometimes we forget to have them included in this conversation. So that is, for example, one thing that we've been working on. And I'd also say that when there are ideas that are trying to be advanced, I don't know about you, but if in our state, we often have the conversation around arts for art's sake, art skill-based versus serving all the other masters, right? It's a constant conversation, and I think it's fabulous because if you don't have that conversation front and center, it's sort of people's fears get fed and fueled. And so for a big example, for us in New Jersey has been our work around arts integration. So now that is a real trigger word for a lot of people because that immediate tension comes up. And so the way we did this was we actually brought people together to have conversations around what it meant. We collectively did the research, what other people across the country have been doing, came up with a shared definition and shared ideas around how to achieve it. And if you're going to call it arts integration versus arts enhancement or whatever, we're all talking on the same page. And that's again where we brought in the teaching artists because we realized we got all the administrators, not all the administrators, there are a lot of them, but we've got people involved in that conversation and they were getting it, the light bulbs were going off, but the people again who were in schools delivering it, we had forgotten to have that conversation with them. And and again, give ourselves a break, we were just figuring it out, so the next phase was that. And so we've done long processes where we use observation, instead of telling them what it is, we sent them out into the field to start observing and, examples to say, what is a best practice? And they're going to decide what it is, not us. And I think, again, we're going to have a much stronger alliance and coalition for it. It's crazy making. I wasn't gray before, but you know, it's fun. We also did the same thing with our collective impact survey tools. We did not decide what we were going to measure. We let the people who are on the ground decide. And, you know, I'm sure we have the next problem challenge becomes is that, you know, it's not the 10,000 teaching artists we have in our state. It was a handful, but now we have to sort of keep teaching over and over again and keep expanding that circle. So that's the fun work, is expanding the circle and creating perhaps master teachers who will be the voice, and they will share it with their satellites.
Great. I have one more question for all of our panelists who've been wonderful today. And again, this is just featuring 2 teams specifically. There's 8 more teams that have so much advice to share that have done wonderful work, and they're in this room. So I invite you to chat with them over lunch, which will be starting right at noon. But last question, because now the SP3 portion, so to speak, is now coming to an end with the 10 states, and now the next stage is sharing it out with the rest of the country. So we're going to have some folks in other states that this is going to be, they're about to embark on something completely new, a new arts education initiative, and they'll be coming to you and say, what's your one piece of advice that you can give me as I embark on this project? And then for Andrew, just if you can, any advice that you have for just the greater, being involved with the political space polling. Lana, it's okay if I put you on the spot first?
I really like those agile and responsive words, to be open to opportunity and aware of what's going on around you, and open to opportunity and responding to it when you can.
I guess one thing, Wendy, that I was thinking when you were just talking about the coalitions and arts integration efforts is something I run into a lot with a lot of my progressive clients in various spaces, is especially where there's big coalitions, is especially some folks that are sort of further on the left, which I am myself. Sometimes they prefer to lose a fight their way than to win. And I, as someone that gets hired to try to help some people win their fights, that frustrates me. So an example of this, and Eric and I were talking about this the other day, I do a lot of work in the voting rights space, and as a progressive that cares about this, I know that voter fraud is not a big deal. I know that voter suppression is, and I want to change those things. But voters don't think that way. They think that voter fraud is a problem, and when you start talking about voter suppression, they think you have a political agenda, then they turn you out. So if you want to pass voting rights enhancements, you need to meet them on their terms. You need to talk about how your enhancement is actually going to improve security of elections, or is going to do this or that. But we have members of the coalition that don't want to talk about that. They think that gets into the other side's frames, or we need to be talking about how there's, over the suppression of minority groups, which is all true. But again, when you bring it back to that suburban mom, she's not going to vote because minority groups get suppressed, which is sad. So I think that's my last point of advice is, if you're working hard to get something passed, to get something implemented, fight the fight to win. Don't lose the fight that you want to fight.
Well, that's a good reminder. Don't worry about being right versus effective.
Sadly, yes.
Right. So I guess for me, you triggered a couple things both of you did. One is just to embrace the naysayers, bring them onto the coalition, versus just trying to figure out ways to deal with them. But, if they're with you, you'll figure out, it'll improve the work. I would also, I started with it really. I think it's about getting data and then getting the coalition of the willing, et cetera. But for me, it's really like you just got to start, because if you think about what the work ahead, you're not going to do it. It's, it's a lot. So just start somewhere, and there will be other people who will pick up other balls for you and with you. So just do it.
That's so great. Can you join me in thanking our wonderful panel today?